we go. Okay. So, welcome, y'all. This week for She's Independence Deal Weekly, we're running a special topics, which is a new process for us. Expect these monthly. We're going to dive into strategy, conversation, discussion. We really just want to up level as investors. And so today we're going to be talking about when and why we pass on deals. Before we get into that, we're having a quick discussion around we have a few investment opportunities. Or follow-ons, meaning we can reinvest in some companies. And Latha just posed a great question that we just wanted to have on this recording for everyone's knowledge. She asked where she can find the latest on some of the deals we already allocated to. And so our member Slack environment, we have deal channels that we kick off whenever we are running diligence on a business. And so the beauty is you can go in and you can search and add yourself to the deal channels. For example, Feedalese and Bone Health Technologies are both companies that we invested in that we have additional opportunity to invest in. And so if you want to see what's the latest, what's the greatest, you can look in the Slack deal channel for both of those. And what we also are doing is we are appending updates on the investor communication side to our confidential investor communications document. So all members have access. We'll drop that in the Slack channel, or I should say Slack, and then also in the Zoom room. Rachel or Idong, if you can drop that link. And this is basically you can see, great, what were the recent updates? Because after we invest, we're getting regular updates from these businesses, and you can say, Bone Health, wow, they thought they were going to sell all these devices, did they? And then, wow, they did sell a ton of devices. And so, you can kind of follow along and see what execution looks like after we've allocated. So does that answer your question, Latha? Any more?
Yeah, no, it does answer
Okay,
my question. And then just
great.
in terms of when you all need to know if we want to reinvest, is there a timeline?
Yes. Great question. Timeline, we are capturing those. We'll get those. I just wrote Aaron today, actually, asking about the timeline. We can check back on the bone health as well to see what that timeline looks like. Um, but I don't have right now like a pressing date, even though I imagine we probably want to figure this out. Or maybe was there something month end, Rachel, if I'm not mistaken? Or that maybe that was a separate deal.
I don't think there was a tight timeline on this.
Okay, great. So we can follow up. Idang, you're on mute.
Yes, thanks. No, so question on the bone health one. So you mentioned that for fetal ease, you can get into on their seed round. Do you know what round this would be for bone health
That's a great question. I believe it might be the same terms, but we have to
with
check.
the initial? Okay.
Sometimes what happens is even if there's further execution and scale,
Mhm.
existing investors, when there's like not a net new round with like new
Round.
terms, they
Mhm.
sometimes have a safe or a pre-existing convertible where they're just accepting more funds from existing investors.
Okay.
Um, so that can happen. So we would have to double check on the terms of bone
On
health.
the
It's a
terms.
great
Okay.
question, and I believe Susan Emerson also posed it. So Rachel, if we
Okay.
could, let's email bone health and ask timeline and then terms on that. But I know that we have three folks interested and more have expressed interest. And again, like
Mm.
we're not pushing anyone. It's if people want to allocate because we also realize and what the topic today is, we've passed on a lot of deals. And so we
Mhm.
love investment opportunities. We love, putting things forward, but we also really want to invest in things that are quality. So we're not just going to invest just to invest. Um, Great. Should we move on to the topic of the day? And it's okay if you have more questions.
I think, Natalie, you want to give a quick update on the holiday party on Thursday and other things? I'll put the
Yeah, this is recorded, so I'm gonna keep to the stuff around the recording for now. And we can circle back on that one later. But just quickly to kind of dive in, I am wearing red. I know I said this before the recording kicked off, but in my Wall Street days, they always said, don't write with a red pen. Like you don't want the markets to go down. You don't want your position to be negative. Um, I just want to remind everyone, angel investing is risky. You expect things are going to go to zero. Like that is a given. What our job is as angels is to say, let's build a portfolio where we feel good about it from the risk reward perspective, what we're allocating to. But at the end of the day, like there will be write-offs, things will go to zero. but that's okay, right? Angel investing is risky. And again, the name of the game is, are some of these things really going to pay off? And so I just want to say, like, red write-offs, like this stuff's inevitable. And what we're going to talk about today is when and why we passed on some deals and learnings. Because every time we say no, or every time you experience an adverse event or write-off, like there's typically learnings around it. And it's not like everything always happens the same way, but we get better and better by running more diligence and spending time to say what do we want to allocate to. So that's what this discussion is. We have a few things that we're going to present, and then it's also open for discussion. So please don't be shy. You're welcome to chime in. You're welcome to ask questions. I mean, that's how we learn. And so first, we're going to talk a little bit about this year. 2025. And we're going to do a more proper year in review, I think, in, our January session, but let's quickly talk about the deals that we chose not to invest in and why we passed. And I know some of you maybe already know some of this, and so we're also going to review some deals prior to 2025, but we just want to do a little bit of a recap. So the deals that we ran diligence on that we did not invest in, Deep Look, Lil Bucks, Cosm. So running diligence does not mean like we need to invest. Running diligence is we're digging in, we're learning more. Deep Look, which by the way, others are welcome to be a part of this because I know this is group diligence and like I didn't even lead diligence in these. I'm sharing, what we kind of came up with as a group. So Dan Lee in this case, was a big part of, making the diligence happen for Deep Look. We came across a number of, let's say, didn't feel good and odd things. They were really close to the vest and didn't want to openly share information. So there was lack of transparency on things like standard deal documents, like what happened or, what their ownership looked like, their capitalization looked like. We got real pushback. The other thing that really struck us as something that was really tough to get excited about or invest in. They wanted to treat us differently, and they were kind of nasty about the fact that we were a smaller check. So there wasn't equity in kind of how they wanted to treat their investors, and there was kind of bullying and just trying to make us feel bad because we asked questions because we wanted to see what was happening transparently and we wanted to understand some things about the business. And I recognize like it's not about hurt feelings at the end of the day, but as an investor, you are stepping into a multi-year relationship with these businesses. And we emphatically care about our North Star is what do we want to see in the world? What is the culture? What is the team? Just because women lead a business doesn't mean they can do no wrong, right? And, it could have been a lot of things. It could have been a lack of leadership or a lack of ownership or understanding, frankly, on their side. And so it was pushback because they didn't feel confident in something. But we experienced, multiple, not just one, but multiple of these communications where it was both, it was clear there were things that felt like sensitivities on their part, but expression and lack of equity and lack of kind of discernment of the way that they communicated that we did not like it. And that made us not excited about investing. So, multiple things there where, again, a bit was cultural, a bit was just logistically and operationally how they were executing on this raise and the way that, they were not wanting to share information. So let me pause because if there are questions on that, any concerns or you don't understand what I'm saying, I want to make sure that there's enough detail.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I actually do have a question on that one because what you were describing, I was wondering if there was a cultural aspect to it. So
Yeah.
where was Deep Look out of? Like what was their background?
Well, the thing I want to state here, because I wasn't like as close to it. This is something that Dan Lee
Right.
was running. But as a reminder, this is one of those ones where the founder was not the CEO. And so you basically had a team that was executing where they didn't necessarily have all the expertise. And there was, how do I say this kindly? There were statements made such as, well, our our CFO says this is inappropriate, right? Meaning, like, even a lack of ownership where it would be kind of like at arm's length.
Yeah.
Um, I would say it seemed like a lack of understanding, but kind of a blaming of they were like, oh, do you not know how to invest? Where some of the language they were using, it felt like they were trying to own something more than they could, and they didn't really understand dynamics. And by the way, we checked in with our venture lawyer who's seen a million deals, and she's like, it's insane that they don't want to share this transparently. So for us, it wasn't like hurt feelings. And like, frankly, like, I don't even have an ego about like needing to be seen as an investor. Like, I just am an investor. But it was an interesting scenario. Um, Good question.
Do you know, as a follow-up to that, do you know who did invest in them or if they were able to close that round? Do you ever follow up with the things that you
That's a
passed on?
really good question. That's a good question. And what I will say is we'll talk about that on the next slide when we talk about some deals that we did pass on. What I will say is it's probably too soon to know. And also they
Okay.
probably wouldn't share that information with us at this point anyway. Um, and I think it's also really important to show up as ourselves, right? And so if you have concerns, if you are trying to align, like we shared openly and we were courteous and professional, but the jabs kind of continued. And so I'm sharing that so everybody's aware. Um, so let's talk about the next one, Lil Bucks. Lil Bucks, so Irang, who led diligence on this one, is on the call, so she's more than welcome to be a part of this. But I know we've kind of already hashed this one out. It was a tough one. They went really quiet. And what I want to point out is solo founders, which in this case, this was a solo founder, there's a lot you need to execute on as a business and to fundraise and to execute and to operate, right? Like it's a lot. And we didn't just check in once, twice, thrice. Like there was a lot of checking in, and this was like weeks of they were quiet. Um, I think there were also some questions about how excited were we also in the business, but at the end of the day, if a business who's fundraising isn't excited or responsive, um, we can't. First, we don't want to fix their problems, right? Like we're a small investor, we're a small check, and if they can't communicate and show up, these are indications of there are issues around operating. But um, we gave them more than plenty of time, and I think this is one where it's just an example of, hey, like we tried and we showed up and we continue to kind of bang down the door, but at the end of the day, you also have to listen to what the business is telling you. And if they are unresponsive, if they're saying things and then not executing, like that's tough. Um, so I'll kind of pause there because we have a lot more to talk about, but I'll pause there. Anyone have thoughts,
You
Okay.
don't anything?
Oh,
I would just add, this one was a lot like Healthy Young Minds of 2024, where
yeah,
they
we're going
built
to talk
the
about that one too.
yeah, they
Yeah.
were all excited, and then suddenly it was like, oh, maybe they're in the middle of a product launch. Let's just give them some, we
Yeah.
gave them a lot of opportunities. So, anyway, on to the next then.
Yeah. And I was going to add that because I think it's a different thing if you had no responsiveness all along.
Yes.
But, they were responsive. They came on the pitch, did a good job with the pitch, responded to our email saying, yes,
Yeah.
we want to go into diligence. And then once we said we're going into diligence, then there was radio silence.
Yeah.
So, and we still don't know till today what happened.
I know. You have to
So
be tuned
that's,
in. You have to be
that's,
tuned in. And our check is not $1 million, right? Like we are a
yeah.
smaller investor and there's nothing wrong with that, but we need to be aware, how well do they execute? And
Mm.
our check alone, like it's not going to make a business that's looking for venture trajectory, like it's not going to make them successful. And so we have to see execution and we have to have our ears to the ground and we have to be aware of these data points. Okay, let's talk about Cosm. So Cosm was one that folks were pretty excited about. Um, and again, others are welcome to weigh in on this, but at the end of the day, like I think there were a lot of data points of, well, it's this big platform play. There's a lot they can do. They're in market, they have sales, and something just like we didn't remain excited. We didn't get more excited. We almost got less excited, you know? And that can happen. And, being in market, so especially for a healthcare company, right? Like being in market, um, you can't just sell the dream, right? Like data matters, numbers matter. And when we dig in and we, are learning and we're, seeing what's actually happening versus what is said at a pitch, do we remain excited? And at the end of the day, like it doesn't have to be some massive red flag like waving in your face. In this case, right, they were responsive, good conversations, but at the end of the day, we just didn't have enough interest. We just didn't have enough excitement. And part of diligence is getting to know the business, whether it's culture, whether it's the numbers, whether it's saying, did this stuff actually happen? And there was never a like big red flag. So I want to point that out, right? It's not like you're going to see a shirt like this waving in your face and saying, don't invest. Um, Anything that anyone else wants to add on COSM?
I agree that we were excited and then we looked at it and then I agree the same thing. I had the same response that, I was excited when we first looked at it, but then kind of it seemed like there were other products out there that were
Yep.
dealing with the same issue, and it didn't seem as interesting after we looked into it more.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy.
Hmm.
And by the way, how brilliant, right? Like we're all a part of this. All of you have been on these calls, stepping into leadership. And so this isn't like, hey, I think this. I'm also sharing thoughts that I've heard from all of you, and I love you all weighing in too, because this is an effort together. We're figuring this stuff out. So I have a few more, several more companies that we passed on in prior years. So again, I think it's about learning and sharing, and maybe somebody's newer to the group or they missed diligence on one of these. So going to share a little bit more about some of those insights and prior deals we passed on. And we passed on more than this, but here are some examples. So Healthy Young Minds came up actually already in this conversation because what happened there, I think, was kind of a blend almost of what just happened out of this latest deal cycle. So first, they were responsive up front, and then they went quiet. They didn't go silent, meaning they were sometimes responding to emails saying, "Oh, well, we have a new CFO coming in." Like, "Yes, we'll move this forward." But they weren't providing the information and it wasn't moving forward. It was like the momentum went to zero. Culturally, I think there was also a question of we were a smaller check, and so they just weren't able to meet us and provide the information we needed. And we are careful as a group that we know we don't write a big check, so we don't ask for a ton of time. But if we can't get standard, deal room, data room information and, introductions and like basic information, like we're not going to invest. And that's absolutely fine. We have to de-risk. We have to run diligence. So that's Healthy Young Minds. Mothership Materials came up actually in conversation, well, briefly this week, because we saw another investor group talk about it, and they talked about it on this kind of pedestal, I'll say. Um, we're very real. We're not going to sit here and say just because we invested, it's the best thing ever. And some people do that, right? They like to talk about their portfolio and say everything's all good, invest with us, invest with us. We ended up being, well, first of all, I should say we were really excited on Mothership up front. Really excited about the category, really excited about what they were doing. But when we were in diligence, a few things happened. We would dig into these stories that we were told. And I don't want to say it was fully false, but I just want to say um, the picture that was painted wasn't necessarily what we saw when we dug in. One was on the fundraising side. So they kept talking about, oh, we have this lead and this money's coming in. And it was so far from what was actually happening, that was tough. We, of course, expect people to have positive expectations. They're fundraising. They have to tell you a story. They have to sell you a vision. But when they kept saying, well, this is happening, and then it doesn't happen, and they keep telling us it's happening the next day or the next week, that's really, really tough. It has to be somewhat realistic, right? And if somebody says this is happening emphatically, like, and it doesn't happen, that's a data point. So the fundraise and traction around that That was one issue. I think the other issue is, again, there was this big vision and we were really excited about things like the pipeline. But when we dug in, the actual execution of what was happening in terms of dollars that we were told this big story, it was much smaller. So, digging in, it was like, oh, there's this small, commercial deal, and it's because of a, pre-existing relationship, and it wasn't the big vision that we were sold on. And there's nothing wrong with, again, having big vision. But when we dug in on the diligence side, it was like the vision was so different than, where they actually were. Vision's great, but don't oversell, where you are to the point where your investors are going to be like, what is going on here? So we have heard good things. We are looping back and we want to get an update on the business. We still love what they're doing. And the other thing is other players are in the space. I'm not saying their IP isn't special. I don't know enough at this point, but just sharing again, why Mothership was a pass. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Okay. Sensate, I brought up, and this was years ago, so some of you might not even know the name of this one. Um, it was really kind of interesting or odd what happened here, and I'm going to bring up actually one of the prior ones as well that we already talked about. Sensate, when they, shared with us in diligence, here are the referrals, and here's people on the team to speak to. Red flags, red flags. um, people that they, had us look into both on the team and then also even their investors, phone calls presented just a lot of questions. Things that were said, it didn't track, it didn't tie out. Investors, like the way that they spoke about it, like things just felt off. One of the core teammates who, the team had mentioned, looking at their LinkedIn, looking at the website, I mean, just so much like didn't make sense. And it's okay if you have a fractional team, but be honest and open and transparent about this stuff. At the end of the day, like, the investor that they touted as this amazing investor and the one investor diligence call we had, it was just kind of a garbage conversation. It left us kind of saying, what the hell's going on here? So, what I want to bring up actually, and we glossed over this earlier when we were talking about diligence. Deep look. One of the things that we didn't actually mention that happened was we actually believe that one of the teammates churned. One of the core teammates even churned, um, and nothing was communicated. And we noticed based on the deck and the website. So at the end of the day, transparency is important. Trust is important. Integrity is important. And it's okay if something doesn't work. But for us to find out because somebody is not sharing that information, that's tough. So I want to point out that happened a bit both with Deep Look, we saw it with Sensate. Um, and I think the other thing with Sensate too, it was selling, and of course you can dig into diligence because as She's Independent members, you have access, by the way, to much more detail if you want to dig into this stuff. But Sensate, it was selling something to consumers. It was direct to consumer, and numbers could look really good, but consumers aren't going to buy multiple things from them. So it's a one and done. You buy it. What happens to the market? There are other products out there. And their marketing spend was really, doing a lot to kind of translate to purchases, but viable, sustainable, market, all of that. We had a lot of questions on the business as well. So we were not able to transparently say we feel good about this when we looked at the numbers. So that was Sensei. Fritch, another one I wanted to bring up that, came up for me when I was just kind of reflecting. And I think similar, and you'll see that there's kind of some pattern recognition here, similar to what happened in some of the other deals we talked about. We just weren't excited when we dug in. Like we were so excited up front. We're like, ooh, this is a cool category and we see it doing all these great things. It's a great market. But at the end of the day, the more we learned, we said, wait, the product isn't where they said. And it doesn't look as good as what they told us. And the engagement numbers, that they're touting, like actually they don't look like that. And so the more you learn, I'm not saying everything is rainbows and unicorns and butterflies, right? But if the more you learn, you're less and less excited, like you got to listen to this stuff. And that's what happened with Fritch. And I know I'm not fully defining what these are. Again, as She's Independent members, you can dig in, you can learn more. We have diligence documented, but this is really just sharing, again, some of what happened and some of why we said no. And every time we say no, I'm proud of us, okay? Because, saying no is not a bad thing. It is not a bad thing.
Can I add one thing for
Yeah,
Fritch?
please.
So this is sort of a financial tools suite platform to get young people. College was their sort of first group they're going for, to really think about money and be strategic, and also just like open up the channels of conversation, right? People don't necessarily talk to one another about what you make on your first job, or what an internship should be paying you in the summer, or how much you should be saving, you know, and or how much an apartment costs in New York City. And so obviously there was one member in our group who was actually that age group. And we went to her and we're like, what do you think? And she's like, this doesn't really speak to me. Right. And the founder of the company had talked about how it was designed for this age group and, gamified and all the things. And this one individual was like, I just don't, it doesn't speak to me. And that said a lot. So that was just another
It's,
piece, I
it's
think,
a
for
great
me.
data point. And it's only one data point, but the point
One.
is, it was so easy to access her. And we're like, hey, like, it wasn't like, oh, this seems nice. She was like, I don't like this, and just doing that diligence and digging in and not just listening to what they say, their rosy feedback. But yeah, it's a great point. And we do this across the board. Don't just take their word as gospel. All right, we have a fun category to talk about next. Here in Colorado, we just had a storm. There's a storm that blew through, I guess, a nor'easter. So who doesn't want to talk about saunas? Am I right? Uh, and if anyone knows me, right, y'all know me a little bit. I talk about it in the book. I love saunas. I love contrast therapy. I love businesses that promote health and wellness. And there's so many of these contrast therapy, hot, cold, communal sauna businesses out there these days. And so I just wanted to share personally a bit of a revelation, or I shouldn't say revelation, but a bit of learning that I went through where I said no to a lot of investments, even though I really liked the category. And then I did invest in one, and it ended up being a write-off. And so I just wanted to share a little bit because, again, this is another example of, I think, what we see a lot and also write-offs that I've experienced. So, cash flow businesses. Cash flow businesses first operate very different than a venture trajectory business. A cash flow business, excuse me, is one where you're not trying to raise, the millions of dollars to scale really fast and get some, crazy valuation. It's really about, all right, we're paying to keep the lights on, we have our staff, the margins, all of it looks different than like a quote unquote typical venture business. So think of your local stores. Think of businesses, not the franchise model, but think of your local businesses where it's like we have a product we're selling or a service we're selling, but it's not so much a one to many, 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 but it's like we have this discrete market, right? Maybe we have this market locally, maybe there is a play to amplify it, but you're not thinking about getting to that $100 million valuation kind of thing. So what I basically want to say is we at She's Independent have seen a lot of cash flow businesses that try to raise like their venture businesses. And a lot of those have been quick passes. Valuation doesn't make sense. The fact that the operator or the leader like doesn't even understand that they're raising on the wrong model. I mean, these are all flags. I have seen a lot of contrast therapy or sauna businesses that are operating like cash flow businesses and trying to raise like venture businesses. So, what I want to say is cash flow businesses in general, right? Like, it's not a totally different business model, but there's a lot that's different about it. Um, what I saw from a lot of these contrast therapy or sauna businesses that was really kind of tough is they would position themselves as venture businesses, and they literally couldn't even execute their one location or maybe two locations. Expertise, execution, this matters whether it's cash flow, venture. And I'd be looking at these decks. I'd be looking at, how they were executing. And a lot of these, even as cash flow businesses, were quick no's. They didn't have the expertise. They weren't executing in strategic and intelligent ways. I said no to numerous, even though I was going and using them as an avid consumer, right? I bought in on this concept and I ended up investing in one. And it ended up being a quick write-off. And so I wanted to share that story. And I share this also in Cash is Queen, which was fun. But um, I think at the end of the day, just because you love something that you shouldn't invest just because you love the idea or the concept. You also shouldn't invest just because you love the people. You need to run diligence. You need to run diligence. I took things that were shared with me as truth. And I did not dig into the numbers. And it literally pains me to say that, right? I'm not embarrassed. I'm telling you, it was dumb. We all learn. But the questions and the conversation on balance sheet and, cash flows and all these things, I didn't tie it out. There were conversations. And we discussed me doing deeper diligence after I wrote the check, which is asinine when you think about it, because I was going to present it and share it with you all in more detail. But basically, what happened was I really liked the team. It was a trusted introduction and referral, not from an investor, not from an investor who invested, that's different, but from a trusted friend and contact. And at the end of the day, I loved the business concept. I loved what they were doing at a high level in terms of how they were thinking about scale, and they'd already executed, on some level. They had multiple businesses or studios, I should say, that were operating, about to hit, a really, high threshold of, cash flow positivity, I should say, but they had over leveraged themselves. They were overextended in terms of their spend, in terms of what they wanted to do to scale. And I knew there was risk, and I knew it was risky the way they were operating. But again, I didn't dig into the actual numbers. So our conversation saying, "Where are you?" I should have forced the data room conversation to say, "Let me actually see the numbers in black and white." Latha, you have a question?
Yeah, this may be beyond the scope of this discussion, but I was curious
Yeah.
if we ever invest in like a revenue-based
Yeah.
investment model.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are investors out there that will like lend money and take a piece of the business, like call it venture debt. We have not done that, but it is something that I know other players who do. It's a different profile. And it's not that we can't. It's a little more complex, let's say, in terms of a different maybe type of funding vehicle. And at the end of the day, like we're not a lender, but hey, we could absolutely look at something like that. We also are actively in conversation with folks like the University of Denver, where they are all about creating more equity in terms of funding and fundraising. And they're looking at these more hybrid models because venture doesn't always make sense for a business. It does not make sense for all businesses. And so recognizing there are different models that can make sense, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I was asking because I've
Yeah.
been to, some venture events where a lot of
Yeah.
the founders there were cash flow businesses, and I'm thinking, well,
Yeah.
what are you doing here?
Yeah.
Um,
Totally.
but they were diverse. There was a lot of
Yeah.
good product, and they needed funding. And I was thinking, and I know
Yeah.
there's this model, so I just wanted to know
I
if we were
think,
into
yeah,
that.
I think the other thing to think about is like we can invest in businesses that have revenues, right? Like that are cash flow businesses. It may just be a different valuation model. And it doesn't mean we have to be a debt player because with debt, it's usually, by the way, like a lot more on the table in terms of capital. Like I still think it makes sense a lot of times that we're like equity funding. It can be a different valuation if it's not a cash flow or sorry, if it's not a venture business. So these are all things to think about. Venture models mean higher valuations. And so I would never want us to get involved in like a cash flow business and have a really small position because that just doesn't make sense. But I'm happy to look at cash flow businesses and even that independent film that we put money into, right? Welcome to the Fishbowl. Like that's not a typical venture business, and we still invested. And there was a lot of non-dilutive funding, and so it was a better, I'd say, ownership position. So yeah, that looked very different than our typical venture deal. Yeah, great question. Great
Thank
thoughts.
you.
Yeah. Um,
So a related question,
yeah,
Natalie, like on the movie one,
yeah.
how do you, because it wasn't like a typical venture type situation, so how do you get your money back, for lack of a better
Yeah, it's a great
word?
question. So part of what we did when we were vetting and looking at the independent film was we wanted to look at, well, what does this mean from a potential payout standpoint? And
Mm,
so we actually shared some articles, both that we found and then also that the team shared with us, Cheryl and Yana, around what film financing can look like. There's a water flow model. So it's basically, okay, who are owners and how do you pay back? And for example, they don't get paid back until investors get paid back. And again, non-dilutive sources, they don't get paid back, right? Like that was more of like kind of think of grant funding, I guess. Um, and so we shared some articles that kind of spelled that out, but it's a different type of model. Um, and so we can reshare those, of course. And you can also look up. I mean, you can look into what does film financing look like, and what's the waterfall, kind of model. But and in the name of the movie, Tracy just asked, it's Welcome to the Fishbowl, and it's not yet formally launched. We've seen some pre-screenings, which have been really great, but they're basically applying for distribution via festivals or partners, and so it's an independent film. And so what that means is they did fundraising, and now they're kind of bringing it to market and seeing what kind of partners or what kind of channels will kind of get them that visibility. Whereas oftentimes folks will go through like the big, let's say the big media houses or whatever you want to call them, the film production houses and facilities to like get their movie like, the full kind of funding and go to market. But again, this is a team that said we care about women centric, we care about, maintaining and kind of preserving what this is, which is women at the core. And so they went the independent route. Uh, Great questions. An open member discussion, by the way. Like if y'all want to talk more about, what these looked like, if you had questions on other deals, maybe we passed on. But it's really just to get your wheels spinning because every time we learn something, every time we have a write-off or we, run diligence and say no, or, you know, realize, wait, this is garbage and, we shouldn't even have brought it this far. These are all things we can learn so that the next time we can say, oh, of course we're going to dig into this in diligence. Of course this is something that we've come across before, right? It's just about strengthening, that investor muscle.
Yeah, so Natalie, I had a question on the write-off. So,
Yeah,
obviously businesses can linger in bad financial situations for a
yeah,
long time. So as
yeah.
an investor, when do you decide or what's the trigger that says now this is a
Yeah.
write-off?
It's a great question. So basically, you either may receive something from the business and it's like a communication and it says, hey, like we're fully winding down. Maybe here's something for, tax purposes. Or the business may say, we're not operational anymore. Like, and that may be enough. So my accountant, for example, he's like, send me what you have. So in some cases, there'll be an actual um, we might actually prepare something that says, it went to zero, or it might be a communication that says the business is no longer operational, the business is wound down, and that is substantial enough to say that's a write-off. And then a write-off, of course, is something that you are taking against, let's say, gains in that calendar year, so that let's just say you made 50 grand on investments and then you had a write-off of 10 grand, right? Like that's net. So you only had 40,000 of gains that are reported, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it offsets it, but
Yeah.
so, as I was saying though, some companies will linger for a really long time.
It
Like
will.
you,
That's
you
correct.
know, you're not
That's
going to get your
correct.
money back,
So,
but they
so
haven't
yeah.
like closed.
No, it's a great question. So what I will say is there's real operational cost to linger. So you won't often see a lot of these companies lingering for a
Okay.
long, long time. That's what I would say. They may
Okay.
linger for a bit. You're also able to say, I'm going to take the write-off this year because I believe it's a write-off, and you can, again, establish that to your accountant.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great questions. Yeah, and there's t loss carry forwards, all things you can deal with your accountant. Yeah.
I thought maybe you could address some of the other things that you see in decks early on when you're looking at them for the first time and you're like, ooh, red flag, ooh, red flag. Like, I'll share
Yeah.
one that I look for every time, which is like, is this the team to do it? Right? Are they coming from the industries they're trying to be
Yeah.
acquired by? Or like, are they working in this sphere? Do they have the academic background in this space? Or is it just someone who got pulled in who thinks they can do it because they've got the bright idea? Right? Who,
Yeah.
we had a businessman in technology decide he was going to do something in the healthcare space, and that everything was translatable. And I was like, so that's the team. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what other
Yeah.
that you pop out for you on decks and early reviews.
I mean, I say there's a million things, but I think team is the most critical, most emphatically important thing always for early stage. Like team, 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 and team. And there's a million things what Rachel's pointing out, expertise, execution, maybe prior execution. I'm a bigger fan of people that, have had some type of real experience. So if they're like right out of school and they're brilliant, it's not that I won't look at it, but that scares me more than somebody who's been through it and maybe had something that didn't work and learned from it, right? Latha?
I was just going to share that, especially in healthcare, it's interesting sometimes having someone who is um, a strong founder in another industry but doesn't know healthcare is not necessarily a bad thing. Like I have a
Yeah,
friend who set up LinkedIn operations in Asia, the entire thing. And then when he was done with that, he started a healthcare company doing one thing and they pivoted really quick. Well, they've already exited. It's only been like 3 years.
yeah,
So I think that, and he executed on something that I know as an inside healthcare person is the thing that we need to do, but like nobody's doing. And because he
yeah,
came from the outside, he was able to see it and just do
yeah.
it, you know?
No, it's
So
Latha, what a great point. And so context is everything, right? Like if the thing's already developed, right? And like we already know there's like a de-risking on it needs to be in market, having somebody with strong execution background, operational background who doesn't know that market, that could be absolutely fine. What I would say is, however, for go to market in healthcare, do you have a team that also understands how to go to market in healthcare? And so it doesn't need to be like if they have something that already works and that's already like, there's many things we could talk to there. I think if they haven't yet developed it, if they have, if they have a complex go to market, like of course there's a million things we could talk about, but it's a really good point. And I'll give you an example. Tint, which has ongoing development, they're in our portfolio. They have ongoing development around their window technology. If they didn't have expertise on their team still with the ongoing development, that would be a problem. But they have the ongoing expertise on their team, and it's ongoing development, which is different than we have maybe this medical device or this thing that's already proven. Maybe there's IP, maybe it's FDA approved, and then it's the go to market. So there's many things, and that's why I'm reticent to be like, this is what I always look for, because what's the stage? Where are they? Like there's a million things. Common sense too. Yeah. Great points. I love this.
Yeah, I think I was also going to add, I mean, to the point that you made earlier, and oh, by the way, I finished your book on the plane, so that was really good. I love the practical
Our buck, you're
stories.
you're in it.
Well, our book. But no, what I liked about it was like the practical stories, because some of you talked about here.
Yeah,
Like, I think it helps you really really learn like what it is to look for. And I agree with you. I think, when I look back at when I first started and now, I kind of notice things quicker,
yeah,
and I feel like I'm better able to pick up on what's promising versus not, a little better than I was before. So it comes back
yeah,
to, I always tease you about your line about just do the thing, but it
yeah,
really is. I feel like over time you kind of get a sense for, and sometimes you can't always quantify it,
yeah,
but
sure.
you can kind of tell, where like, okay, there's something that feels good about this, and and then the data is backing it up versus,
Yeah,
okay, like Tracy was saying at the beginning, it kind of looks good, and then you start digging in and you're like, oh, well, maybe it doesn't look so good.
yeah,
But yeah, I think the more deals you look at, the more of this pitches, the more of all of that, you just kind of get better
I love it. Well,
at saying
thanks
stuff.
for weighing in. And yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's like pattern recognition is real, right? Our brains, these amazing supercomputers, it's not like things are going to be exactly the same and it's not like things don't change and evolve, but there's so many flavors of that feels off or this looks exciting, you know? And so the more deals you look at, like frankly, like look at a million deals. And that's going to give you more conviction and more understanding of what do you like, what do you not like. And even if you can't put words around it, right? Like you're going to gravitate towards some, others are going to be quick passes, and that's a part of the journey. Yeah. And if you only look at some deals and you invest in, one or two and you only looked at 10, they're probably garbage. And the nice thing about how we operate, we look at so many together and collectively, right? And so we have a bigger funnel because you don't want to invest in like a few deals that you look at. You want to look at a bunch of deals or have a group that looks at a bunch of deals. And then you want to be able to say, okay, let's filter out to say which ones look really great. Maybe it's the timing, maybe it's the scope, right? Like maybe it's the go to market. But at the end of the day, like you have to have a big universe and then you have to run that diligence. Yeah.
Yeah, like during the deal calls, every now and then, we talk about like the frogs, right? Every now and then we got to look at a deck that's like, oh boy, because we need to learn from that, right? Like,
Yeah.
are we five
Yeah.
slides in and we don't know what they're doing
I
yet?
know. I know. Um,
Is there too
we,
much
we
going
learned, we
on?
learned so, we learned so much from the passes.
You do.
Okay, so
So
maybe we'll
glad.
cut off just the recording is like not too long. Maybe let's cut off the recording